That is perfect. We are live. All right. Ryan, I'm so happy that you are here with us today. So excited to have you as a guest. And I love what you've been up to and your message. But before we dive into all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grow up, kind of what you're working on now, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, that's pretty broad.
Yeah.
Where I grew up in a small town in southern Utah. I'm the founder of Order of Man. It's an organization designed to give men the tools, equipment, resources, conversations they need to excel as men. So we've been going for about 5 years, and it's been a good journey. And I'm a father. I'm a husband. I mean, what do you want to know?
So I have to say that what attracted to me to you and why I wanted you as a guest on the show was specifically because of you founding this thing that me and my buddies all talk about all the time, which is number one, there's sort of a lack of masculinity that is out there, and a quick story around that, and then two, what is left of sort of masculinity, a lot of guys don't know where to find that stuff and ask and feel comfortable. And let me give you a good description. So a few years back, I'm in Boston. I'm washing my car. I'm at one of those car wash places, and this guy comes up to me, and we're talking muscles, chains, tattoos, just yoked dude, and he's like beelining it right at me, and I'm like, this is interesting. And he's clearly on a mission to come talk to me. And he comes up to me, and I'm expecting some sort of interesting confrontation.
Right.
And he goes, hey man, can you help me put air in my tire?
Oh,
And I
really?
said, what? And I walk over, he's got this brand new Lexus. The tire is complete. I mean, it's on the rim. I mean, it is not just low, it is out. He has
Yeah,
no idea. He's a grown ass man, has no idea how to put air in his tire
that's
or how
funny.
much air goes in there. Right. And,
Yeah,
and that,
in a lot of ways, you can't fault. I mean, you can fault him because at some point they should learn that. But yeah, I mean, unless you learn how, I guess, how would you know that, right? There's a
right.
great quote by Douglas Wilson that says, I think it was Douglas Wilson. He said, "If boys don't learn, men won't know." And he never learned that, right?
Right.
So how would he know?
Right.
That's pretty common, and it's even more than that. It's how to throw a punch, how to defend yourself, how to shoot a firearm, how to ask for a promotion, how to ask a woman on a date, how to treat a woman on a date, like all of these things that you would think that men inherently know, but I learned a lot of this stuff at a late age too because I was raised primarily by my mother and didn't have a whole lot of male influence. I didn't have a permanent father figure in my house, and so I can certainly empathize with where that guy's at. Because yeah, unless you learn from men, there's a lot of things that you just won't know.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, a lot of masculine culture is to not ask, right? We're famously known to not ask for help as a gender to the point where it's almost a meme,
Yeah,
right? And so, we
yeah. I
never
mean,
left for directions,
because it's an ego thing, right? I
of
mean,
course.
for him to walk up, like I'm even thinking for him to walk up like that and be that assertive, I'm like that's actually pretty impressive because most guys just wouldn't. They'd ride around on the rim of their Lexus, indefinitely because they don't know how to fix it, right, and end up doing more damage than good. But yeah, I think men generally, as a sex, tend to have larger egos than women, and so anything that would highlight ignorance is to be avoided. I think that's pretty common.
Yes. Yes. So let's back up for a second. How did you briefly mentioned that you were raised by your mom, but tell me, how do you figure out this much needed niche? How does that come about?
Uh, I had a podcast. So my background is financial planning. So I was in the financial planning business for about 9 years, almost a decade, and I really loved the medium of podcasting. In fact, I had another podcast with my financial practice that I owned, and it was all centered around teaching medical professionals how to manage their money and their investments. And I realized I really loved this medium of podcasting. I enjoy talking with people. I enjoy learning this information, putting the information out, serving those who I want to serve. I just realized I didn't want to continue to have that same conversation about financial services. Like I was kind of burnt out a little bit, frankly, on it.
Sure.
So Because I had done the podcast, I thought, man, what a great opportunity to get some one-on-one mentoring and coaching from other men that I admired and respected and that I wanted to learn from when it came to how to grow my business, how to lead my family, how to get in shape, all of these things that I wanted to do personally.
Right.
Uh, and the benefit of it was that I got the instruction, right? I got the coaching via
Mhm.
podcasting like we're doing now. And then what was in it for them was me being able to share it with my community and network, which was non-existent at the time. So I created it, right? I created it in March of 2015 and told some friends what I was doing. And that gradually grew into their friends and their friends and their friends and so on. And now we reach millions of men across the planet who are interested in the exact same thing I was interested in and still am interested in, which is to become a more capable, moral, strong man, leader of my family, my community, the business, wherever I show up.
Yep. So that has been a key fascination of mine, which is how I discovered you originally, because the idea of the sort of the romantic idea of someone between sort of James Bond when it comes to sort of that gentlemanly, right? Knowing how to properly order a cocktail, dress properly, gamble properly, flirt with a woman, right? That quiet confidence that he had was amazing, right? So I always sort of had that as one ideal, and then the other ideal I had was more sort of Jason Bourne-esque, and not from the spy perspective, but just multiple languages, super in shape, could handle himself in a combat situation, sort of creative problem solver. And I thought, man, if I were to aspire to be anything, it would be the most interesting man in the world, James Bond and Jason Bourne, merged into a good dad and a great husband. Right? That would be
Yeah.
my perfect idealize of what I would want to be.
I think there's attributes to both of those characters that, and we better be sure that we understand that they're characters, right? That they're
Mm-hmm.
fabricated. But I think
Right.
there's elements of, like you said, being able to converse with a beautiful and attractive woman and to woo her over. I think that's actually something that is a powerful skill, something that would be good to develop. And then highly competent and intelligent, right? And then you take Jason Bourne, who's highly capable of defending himself and other people, and he's definitely got some moral convictions.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a common problem between those two as well, and that problem is they're the lone wolf,
Right.
right? They do things on their own. That they ride solo, they operate solo, they're not team players, and so we've been John Wayne, very much the same deal, right? Kind of a different archetype, but a loner, right? And he can't
Right.
work well with a team, and that creates all sorts of problems. So along the path of us developing as men in culture and society, we began to move away from tribal masculinity, right? This is us operating in the context of other men, how we band together to protect the tribe and the community and the resources and our women. And then we moved over into the idea that the lone wolf, the alpha wolf, he's lone. Even wolf's not a great analogy because wolves operate in packs,
Right.
but just this lone wolf who goes out and does his own thing. And the luxury of modern times have afforded us to be able to do that, but I think it comes at an expense. And in many ways, it's our own sanity and well-being. And so men are isolated, they exclude themselves, they don't spend time around other men, and then you run into situations where a guy doesn't know how to put air in his tire or
Right.
defend himself or any number of skills and traits and characteristics that we need to be able to develop so that we can be a more effective man.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'll take it to a minor version of that, which is I obviously own a cigar business, and as such, we have hosted numerous cigar events, from kind of backyard gatherings to Oscar parties at the Ritz Carlton in Beverly Hills, right? Everything in between. Commonality: the amount of guys, men, that are willing to admit they don't know how to cut and light a cigar. Just the basics. Forget about
I
picking
don't.
one. I'm just talking about like cut it, light
Yeah,
it, real simple.
I don't know how to do that.
A surprising amount of them don't know how to do it, which is totally fine. The unfortunate part is how few are willing to ask, right?
Sure.
And because if you, it's not about the ritual. It's not about sort of the etiquette of doing it. It's about you spent a lot of money on this thing. If you do it wrong, you kind of ruined it,
Mm-hmm.
right? You've wasted it.
Or
So
just to try new things. Like how often do men avoid trying new things because they aren't willing to look foolish? I just picked up about 10 months ago now, really heavily involved in jujitsu.
Yeah.
And those individuals with an ego, an over sense of ego, either they don't even try, or they go to one or two classes, they get their asses kicked, and they're like, okay, well, I'm not doing that anymore,
Right.
because they don't want to look foolish.
Right.
But looking foolish, I mean, it's not, obviously it's not fun, it's not an enjoyable experience, but looking foolish is part of the game. Like, you actually have to look foolish for a little while before you become proficient, whether it's smoking cigars or in jujitsu or leading your family well. Like, you have to be willing to look foolish for a while.
Yeah. I actually also roll, and I was a beginner once, and I still feel like a beginner most of the time.
Yeah,
So,
no doubt.
and yeah, that humble pie that you are forced to eat if you stick with it, while isn't super fun in the beginning, boy, when it comes to learning and being a better person overall, it is so critical. And I don't just mean with jujitsu; I mean learning something new, sucking at it, working through the suck, right? Working through the uncomfortableness of you being awful at it and pushing through. That makes you so much more of a complete person.
Mm-hmm.
And I really got that idea from my old martial art instructor from a long time ago, who I trained with for 20 years, which was, his thing was, listen, the likelihood of you needing to defend yourself is statistically low. So
Mm-hmm.
why do you burn so many calories and work so hard and spend all this time and money and what have you to train in this art when statistically the odds are you probably won't need it. God willing, you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, because it's a vehicle, it's a structure to be a complete person, right? To have the discipline, the confidence to be a better father, to be a better husband, to be a better boss, a better employee, to make where you are, wherever that place is, safer and a better place just by your presence.
Yeah,
And man,
definitely.
that resonated.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we don't make decisions in a vacuum, right? So if you're improving yourself in one capability, in this case, martial arts, and your ability to defend yourself physically, that's naturally going to translate into other areas of your life. I mean, you're learning discipline, commitment, sacrifice, pain, pushing through pain, grit, resiliency, toughness, and not coincidentally enough, that's the same set of skills that you need to succeed as a father,
Yes.
or to start a new business, or to lose weight, or ask for a promotion, or any number of things that we want to engage in on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. So describe sort of the first couple of months of starting this journey, because this is super interesting. How do you create this niche? I get that you're passionate about it and you saw a need. That's sort of step one. Okay. Then you started a podcast, and people slowly started to get involved with that podcast. Take me from sort of that point forward for 6-12 months. Tell me what that journey looked like.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it wasn't really all that slow. And I think that's a testament to some things that we did right, our
Yeah.
messaging and our marketing. I mean, I believe from a marketing perspective, we've always done it fairly well. Obviously, we have some room for improvement, but that's something that I have an affinity for, that I enjoy. But it's also timing of the market, and I can't say that I timed it. I'm just saying that we got into the market at the right time, the right place, when masculinity seemed to be on the decline, if not that, at least dismissal of masculinity.
Yes.
And so, or never really fully learning how to be men. So I think we stepped into it at the right time. The other thing that I think we did very well was built community. And that goes back to what I was saying about Lone Wolf, is that if everybody's just going at it alone, you don't get to magnify or ramp up or I should say leverage. You don't get to leverage your success, your failures, your setbacks, your wins, and through community, you get to leverage that, right? So it's been said that a smart man learns from his mistakes, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So when I started Order of Man, and this was very fortunate, I was looking at, how do we create a fraternity? How do we create a brotherhood? That's part of the reason we called it Order. It's play on words. Order, bringing order and structure to what it means to be a man, but also order, fraternity, organization, brotherhood, right?
I like that.
Yeah. So that was always my intention. And it was to bridge the gap between what we know and what we actually do. So all the information's out there. You talk about creating a niche. Like, I didn't create anything, it's already out there. The things that I share aren't necessarily new or these novel concepts. They're ideas that are as old as time. And so I just took that information and leveraged it in a community environment, a community setting, and let the match burn and let it catch like wildfire. And that's what it did. I encouraged other men to invite their friends and their colleagues and their coworkers and their dads and brothers. And through those leveraging efforts and all of us working collectively together towards some common good, or at least some common objectives, we leveraged each other. Hey, I learned what not to do. Because look, I'll tell you, we have 68,000 guys in our Facebook group, and I go through there every day. And I'm like, man, don't do that, right? And I see some common trends of like, you can see it. It's like mistake, 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 mistake. But you can also see common trends towards succeeding as well. And so when you start to put those trends together and you see 68,000 men conversing and learning from each other, that's a very, very powerful strategy.
Yes.
If it was me just sharing what I know, I mean, like who am I to tell other people what it means to be a man? I'm on the same path. I might be a little bit further ahead in some aspects, and I'm probably a lot further behind in other aspects. So if I'm just coming to you and putting myself on this pedestal of masculinity and saying, this is the pinnacle of masculine achievement, yeah, no man's going to accept that.
Right.
No strong, capable man anyways. You might get a bunch of followers, but I'm not totally interested in that. I want other strong, capable, motivated, ambitious men, and they're not going to be led by somebody who isn't that way. But when we all work together to share, okay, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and I give men an outlet to be able to coach and to mentor, that serves those who need the mentoring well, and it serves those who would like to mentor well also.
Yes. That was incredibly well said. So I appreciate you really sharing that. In this era, I have found that one commonality that Americans have generally is whatever the trend is, we go with the trend for a minute, and then there's a group, a subset of people who haul ass in the other direction, right? And whether that's music, whether it's fashion, it doesn't matter. It tends to have that whipsaw. Let me give two obvious examples. Hairband music went from hairband to what? To grunge, right? It went from men wearing like spandex and mascara and long hair to men wearing clothes at the Salvation Army.
Right.
Right.
The
like
antithesis of it. Sure.
Right. And you see that with how we choose presidents. You see that with how we choose fashion and music, like everything. We have this sort of, it pendulum swings one way and we violently swing back in the other direction, right? We rarely actually land sort of in the middle. And so as a guy who considers myself a pretty masculine guy who has these masculine pursuits that I enjoy, and I have that commonality of women should be strong women and embrace their femininity. And that's a beautiful thing. And men should do the same thing with masculinity. And I view those things as keys on a piano, right? If they're all the same, the piano doesn't sound very well. But if they're all different, it sounds fantastic. We need that balance back and forth, right? That yin and yang, whatever you want to call it. We've recently come through an era of toxic masculinity, where we've talked about how a lot of the masculine traits that men have are very negative. I disagree. I think there are traits that people, not just men, people can have that are very toxic, 100%. But nothing that is masculine is inherently toxic. I don't believe in that. And what I have seen at least is, because that trend sort of reared its ugly head, there was a group of guys who went, whoa. No, I like doing this masculine stuff. That doesn't mean I was ever inappropriate or did anything wrong or what have you. And it almost seems like that inspired a trend to focus on what I call real masculinity, right? A real masculine man doesn't do those inappropriate things. He's the person who stops that. He prevents that. He calls those people out, right? That's kind of the inverse. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. I know there was a lot in there, but just...
I mean, I think you're right for the most part. I would say one thing, I don't qualify masculinity as real masculinity, because why? It's redundant.
Sure.
It's just masculinity.
Yeah.
So I don't qualify like that, because if you do, then you have to qualify or at least talk about the other aspect when people would say toxic masculinity, which is a term I don't subscribe to either.
Agreed.
Right? So there's masculinity and there's not masculine. Like that's
right.
the way it is. So.
Like,
but yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think men are generally sick of being dismissed, being undermined, being mocked, not being appreciated. And that's not to say that we're the victims. I can never take the victimhood stance. And there's plenty of men's movements who do. They take it to the extreme and they become this extreme version, basically the men's version of extreme feminism.
Yeah, of course.
And it's not that we're the victims. It's just that, hey, here's some things that we see wrong, or here's some trends that we see in society. Obviously, there's some issues with our young men. It's disturbing, to say the least. More and more children, not just boys, but children, daughters, sons, girls, boys, are growing up without a permanent father figure in their life. They're being taught things that aren't accurate and true about the way that men have generally and typically showed up, and the good that we provide, and the protectors that we are. So yeah, I think there needs to be a counter argument to the dismissal and undermining of what masculinity really means. And so anytime that you have, and here's how you know if you're on the right track. If you hear people say, "Thank you for saying that. I've been thinking about that forever." Or it's like you're in my mind. You've been saying the things I've been thinking for so long. That's how you know you're on the right track. And you know what? A lot of people, for whatever reason, are afraid to share what's on their mind. They're afraid of the mockery or the ridicule, the potential negative ramifications, like losing a job. I mean, I can't tell you how often I hear from men who say, "Hey man, I really appreciate what you said on that last post or that last podcast. I just wanted to send this message because I can't share that publicly because my boss follows me." You know, so there's potential negative ramifications. And it's not just about masculinity. It's about politics and religion and all these other things that are so sensitive that people can't have discussions. You know, I have friends on both sides of the political aisle. I have straight friends. I have gay friends. I have friends that believe in capitalism. I have other friends that believe in, I mean, I have it all across the spectrum. It doesn't necessarily make me think less of that individual, as long as that individual is moral and ethical and living within the legal bounds of what we've established. Like, I have no problem with that individual, you know? So we just live in interesting times. And yeah, I've never really been afraid of sharing my opinion and my perspective. And it's funny because I do have people who say, you know, "Who are you to tell me what it means to be a man? That's just your opinion." Well, no shit. Like, I don't have to qualify my words with, "This is my opinion." Any rational human being knows that anytime, the majority of times that somebody opens their mouth, that this is their opinion. It isn't doctrine. It isn't gospel. It's my opinion. And it's worked for me. And it's worked for thousands, if not millions of men. And if you feel like it'll work for you, the things that I share, then by all means, let's do it together. If you don't, then go find whatever it is you're looking for. Or better yet, start it and be the counter argument to what we're sharing. Like, I think the world needs all kinds of conversations, not just mine, not just yours. The arguments to this, our arguments to theirs, it's all good. As long as people can be open and receptive and learn to not take things so personally and decide to be offended and upset and victimized by everything that somebody might say that is in disagreement with what they say. It's pretty pathetic, actually.
Yeah. So I have two interesting stories that I'd love to tell you and get your take on. So one, this is years ago, and I'm calling on a client. And back then I used to work in finance, and it was a group of financial advisors who worked at UBS in California. And there was kind of the head guy and then his right-hand man. He had two sales assistants who were these older women. And then they had kind of an events coordinator. She was in her 30s at some, let's just say 35 for round numbers. Okay. So I said, "Hey guys, I'm gonna bring in sushi for you guys for lunch. I'm gonna buy lunch for just the team. I'll grab some sushi. We'll go in the conference room. We'll chit chat for a little bit and you guys can go back on your way." Great. So I got the order from the two gentlemen. I went over to see this woman and I said, "Hey, do you think the girls want anything?" Referring to the two women who are gray-haired older women in their 70s. And she dressed me down and she says, "They are not girls, they are women. Do you think that the other two, I don't want to use their names, would appreciate being called boys?" And I looked at her and I said, "Yeah, actually, they'd be totally fine with it. They are my boys." That's a common euphemism for, a term of endearment, right? It's calling them my boys, like those are my boys, right? And she was so mad because I referred to two older women as girls who, from their generation, they would probably appreciate me calling them girls. But she was so upset by it. And I thought, are you upset because you think I was being sort of inappropriate or dismissive? or you just not comfortable in your own skin. You're just not comfortable with sort of who you are. You haven't really, you haven't become confident, if you will, in your own thoughts and beliefs. And thus, when you hear something else, it bothers you, it triggers you because it sort of points at something inside yourself. I'd love to hear what you think of that interesting interaction.
Yeah, I've actually made the conscious effort of calling women women because I think it is a level of respect. I say men. I don't say boys. I say men. So I'm not going to call women girls. I call them women. That's what they are to me. So I think. That being said, like I don't think what you said is wrong. I don't think there's anything to necessarily be overly offended about. But there's also times where we should be respectful and considerate about the way people want to be addressed.
Right.
So it's not always so black and white, But yeah, look, people have called me the wrong name, right? Just in general, just a little mistake. Pronounce my name Michler. Like I don't get offended.
Right.
I don't get upset. Like it doesn't ruin my day. It just they mispronounced my name or they didn't know or they didn't care. And fine, whatever. Like
Right.
we'll just drive on. So, if somebody mispronounces my name on a podcast, for example, I'll make a small correction and just say, hey, I'd want to know if I mispronounce somebody's name. So here's how you say it. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then we just drive on with our day. Like generally, I don't think that you in this interaction were trying to be dismissive or misogynistic. But I think a lot of people would want to interpret it that way,
Right.
so that they can score some virtue points, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm going to correct you. I'm going to put you in your place so I can be virtuous and appear virtuous to other people or feel good about myself.
Right.
Look, you weren't being rude. You weren't trying to undermine who they were as people and human beings. Mm-hmm. It's just there's a lot of things that people get worked up about that they just should not get worked up. There's greater things to be worried about than being called a girl or maybe they should be addressed as women, but there's greater things to worry about than that.
Right. And I should note that I had, at this point in the story, I had known them for 5 years.
Right. So you're connected, right? You know them.
Right. They're very friendly, very cordial. It was
just context is important for sure.
Very important. Yes. So the other story, and actually when I was learning more about you and knowing that we were going to be on this podcast, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was this moment in my life where I became saddened by the state of masculinity that was in the room, or at least my perceived belief of what masculinity was to me, to be fair. And so this is how the story unfolded. I was in Sacramento, California. I was at a coffee shop, a very large coffee shop, and it was quite busy. I was in between appointments, so I was wearing a suit, and I'm sitting down, typing on my laptop, drinking a cup of coffee, just sort of waiting for my next meeting. And this woman comes in, and she's not dressed badly, and that's going to be important. That's an important part of this story. That's why I bring it up. And she has an interesting engagement with. She goes to the restroom and has an interesting engagement with ordering coffee, and it was of note. She leaves, but pleasant, very normal. She leaves, walks out the door, comes right back in, and starts screaming and berating the two women, younger women who were behind the counter. And I mean, accusing them of stealing and Jekyll and Hyde. I'm truly Jekyll and Hyde. Went from pleasant but odd to extreme, and her posture and her words made it clear to me that violence was very, very near, right? We were on the precipice of violence, right? So there was posturing, there was the compression of space. So she was being very aggressive. And I went, okay, this went from uncomfortable client reaction or customer reaction to there's possible violence here. And I don't know what is this woman's deal. Something is off. So I got up and I had my hands down by my side, and I pushed myself, not physically, but literally, between the counter and this woman. So I was nose to nose with her. And she's pointing in my face and screaming terrible, terrible things at me. And I'm just very calmly asking her to leave. Hey, let's just step outside. Let's just go outside. I'm just asking you to come outside. You're upsetting the other customers, but speaking slowly, very calmly, hands down by my side. I'm trying to project this image of cool, calm, no, let's de-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. And I'm walking her, if you will, getting her to slowly walk backwards towards the door until she feels like, okay, I'm out of here. And so eventually she turns around and goes out the door, and one of the baristas comes up and locks the front door of the business because she's visibly shaken. All right, right?
Right, right.
And at that moment, I was able to kind of look around the room, and I was really hurt that of the men in the audience and the men in that were customers, only one other guy stood up, just one, and he didn't walk over to help. And I thought, I'm a grown man. She is a woman. That's why my hands are down by my side. I could really use sort of show of force so that violence doesn't have to happen. Right? If it's 2 or 3 guys standing there saying, "Miss, you really need to leave," it's a much less violent, less confrontational way to get that person out the door. And it didn't happen. They just sort of sat and cowered and what have you. Long story short, the woman belonged to a halfway house around the corner. And that's who she was, which is why she wasn't a crazy homeless person. She was someone who had a mental disability,
right?
That somehow had found her way into there, and that's what all that was. And but my point in the story wasn't all of that. It was after that interaction, I was bummed out. I'll be very honest with you. Like, I looked around and was like, "Come on, guys! Like, where were you? None of you had my back. Like, no one's going to stand up and say, 'Hey, this is inappropriate. You need to.'" So for right. I was like upset. I had to call my guy buddies and just be like, "Hey, what do I think about this? Like, how do I feel?" I was so confused. I was lost, man. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally people are just conditioned to be non-confrontational, right? It's like, if you think about schooling, for example, it's sit down, shut up, color within the lines, do what you're told, don't rock the boat, don't push the system, like, just do what you're told. And so we've been taught so long to toe the line that when something extraordinary comes up, then we don't know how to deal with it because we're supposed to sit down and do what we're told and not question authority or buck the system. So, I mean, these people have been conditioned to do that. You know, I had a great conversation with a Marine, a former Marine, I guess once a Marine, always a Marine, but he's the youngest living Medal of Honor recipient, and in the Marine Corps, I believe, or maybe it's all branches, but either way. He jumped on a grenade. The grenade was thrown over his over the wall and onto his observation post, and he jumped on the grenade and ended up saving a fellow Marine and ended up surviving. Obviously, that's why we were having the conversation. And I asked him. I said, you know, did you respond intentionally, or was it just something unconsciously just happened? And he didn't know the answer because he doesn't remember much right before and leading up to the blast. But he attributed it to his training. He said, I was trained to do that. I was trained, you know, we heard stories of Medal of Honor recipients and heroes and people jumping on grenades, and we were conditioned to believe that this is how you respond. And we went through drills and scenarios. And so he was trained to respond that way. And that's exactly what he did when the situation called for it. And during the situation you're talking about, you responded the way you were trained.
100%.
The men 100%. And the women in that environment, including the barista, responded the way that they were trained, for better or worse, or lack of training. But they responded according to their own scripts, dialogues, conversations, experiences, and patterns that had been reinforced in their mind. So yes, it is a shame. It's a shame that we've been conditioned to be non-confrontational to the point that we won't spot or point out things that are potentially damaging or destructive, that we won't step into harm's way. I had a very similar experience with a man who was yelling at 2 elderly women. Now, I don't know the situation. I don't. Maybe those women are in the wrong and he's right. I don't know. But that was beside the point. The point was like, this wasn't going to happen in front of me. And so I stepped between him and the 2 women and de-escalated the situation. And, you know, he said some things and that was the end of it. And then he went on about his way, because I was trained to do that, right? I was in the military. I had that background. I wasn't going to let that happen. And so it is unfortunate because men are the protectors. We are. We've been that way for thousands and thousands of years. We're evolutionarily and biologically hardwired to protect, to step into harm's way, to take risk more so than our female counterparts. It's the way we're built. It's the way we operate. And to see more men feminized through their schooling and culture is unfortunate, and it leaves a lot of potentially destructive and damaging situations, whether it's violent encounters, situations like this that just happen more often because men aren't willing to step into that path.
Yes. I love that. So let's lighten the mood as we're coming towards the end of the show here. One of my favorite books on this subject is "In 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks" by Adam Carolla. It's just a funny,
I haven't seen it. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, he's a comedian, right? So it's very tongue in cheek, and it's
I've been on his podcast actually. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so his book is fantastic on this exact subject.
Cool.
And he talks about the feminization of men. But hey, let's say that like many 20-year-old-ish guys, you kind of recognize this and you're interested, right? They find you. What are some things, resources, places they can go? Kind of give me A, B, and C for steps of, hey, I want to sort of embrace this in a safe way. What should I look for? Where do I go?
Generally, the answer is just find other masculine men. That's it. If you can put yourself in an environment with other masculine men, some of their traits and characteristics and habits and the way they think and view the world will rub off on you naturally and inevitably. A great place to start would be, not currently, but you can find that in the gym. You can find that in jiu-jitsu. You can find that at a shooting range. You can find that in some sort of like a hiking club. There's masculine men. There's other organizations, maybe even business organizations or networking groups that you belong to that, maybe there's a handful of guys you're like, oh, that's a masculine man right there.
Yep.
Get connected with him, add value to his life, ask that he add value to your life. And gradually you build up friendships with people who are more masculine, and they're going to teach you what you need to know. And that's going to rub off onto you. I mean, it's as simple as that. It really is. It's not an easy thing, because you have to be willing to look foolish and place yourself in uncomfortable situations. But it's very simple. If you were genuinely interested in it, that's what you would do. Now, you can read books. There's a book called Wild at Heart by John Eldredge I recommend, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, even my book, Sovereignty, The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men, will teach you some of the fundamentals. But unless you get around and rub shoulders with other men, you're not going to learn it. You're not going to embrace what it means to be a man and how men show up. So yeah, read books, listen to podcasts like the ones we're doing here, get involved in men's organizations, and then put yourself in the environment and proximity of other masculine men.
Yeah. Two groups that I've really enjoyed right along this line, and you mentioned one, which was the shooting range. To take it one step further, if you've ever gone to shooting classes, right? Tactical classes.
Sure.
Even just the basic stuff, right? Just how to fire a pistol, how to fire a long rifle. And Sig Sauer is a school I recommend. There's some great schools out in Las Vegas, actually. Mm-hmm. Those are, number one, they're super fun, right? It's a skill you should learn. They're super fun. And the people that you meet there are from such great and diverse backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And you guys all sort of equally suck, right? Yeah. Because you guys all join the same kind of
You're level. There to learn, right?
You're there to learn. So instantly you have this some camaraderie of like, wow, we thought we knew how to shoot. You don't know anything until you've been with a real world-class instructor. Then you realize how much, right?
Right.
I would take that same example to cars, actually. Car clubs, especially car clubs that actually drive, right? Not just the shine and show on a Sunday, but vintage car racing or any of that. It's the same person. It's the same type of guy, right? If you've ever had a chance to go to the Monterey Historics in Laguna Seca, which is you would think, because of the cost of the cars on the track, these are vintage cars that can cost upwards of millions of dollars. You would think that the guys that are racing it would be kind of snooty or too fancy or what have you. I have not found that at all. Actually, I found quite the opposite. They're willing to get grease under their fingernails. Their knuckles are busted up. They might have a $20 million car, but they'll help you change a tire or help you with materials or just bullshit about cars. It's not what your expectations are. Very different reality.
Interesting.
They're the greatest guys. They're there to have creative problem solving because they're taking these vintage cars and going 100 miles an hour on the track. And they're not there for prize money. Right. This is just for fun. And it's the great group of people. So I highly recommend not just the Monterey Historics, but that whole world, right? You can get into racing for not a lot of money, right? A couple of grand, you can buy an old Mustang and go tear things up and have and meet some amazing people.
Yeah, that's cool.
So those
I
would be
like
the
that
two
idea.
that I would recommend. Okay, so as we're getting here closer to the top of the hour, what inspires you for what you've built is very, very impressive and your level of success. What would
Thank
you
you.
like to see it turn into over the next just 2 or 3 years? The kind of the short term here.
Yeah, men seem to thrive best. I know I certainly do, and I'm sure you're much the same way around competition and having a path to run on and advancement. We were talking about jujitsu earlier. If we weren't interested in that, there would be no belt system, right? But we have the belt system, and what do we do when we look at the color of somebody's belt? You size them up. You're like, I think I can take this guy. Usually, you're wrong, and but that's what we do. We compete. Hey, like I'm gonna beat this guy. I'm gonna submit this guy, right? We compete and we look at how to advance. So I've always had the thought of like, how do you codify masculinity? I don't think it's so black and white. I don't think you can say this is exactly what it means to be a man. But if I can give men a track to run on and a path to run, I think that would be a noble pursuit. I think that would help men see like, okay, so I do need to know how to put air in my tire in addition to changing the oil, changing a tire, replacing an oil filter, like basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
So from that to martial arts, to hunting, to physical fitness, to taking a woman on a date and being romantic, to leading children, like all of these things are very important. So we're in the process right now of putting together an achievement and advancement initiative within our exclusive brotherhood. It's called the Iron Council. But I also think getting together physically, because most of what we do, especially now in this corona apocalypse, if you will, it's all digital, right? Because we have separation. So I realized that the more we embrace technology, as much as it's wonderful, because you and I are having conversations like this, there's a real need and a desire for men to get together face to face, shoulder to shoulder, and engage in some physical activities. And so I really see organizing some chapters across certainly the US, but if not globally as well over the next several years. So those are the two biggest initiatives I'm working on currently.
Yeah, I really, really love that. Not to make this all about jujitsu, but the comment you made me chuckle about, you see the person's rank and you size them up and go kind of, can I take this guy? Can I not? What is that going to look like? And so I remember my first day at jujitsu, I was wearing my gi, a non BJJ gi, right? I was wearing an old gi that I'd had from a previous non-jujitsu system. And a couple of the guys that I was working out with that day were like, oh, so you did karate or something, right? Like kind of the probing, like, oh, you know how to maybe punch somebody, but you don't know how to do this, right? Was the underlying kind of vibe, if you will, of the question. Now, why I chose to stay at that school was because the instructor did the opposite of that. He said, okay, good, you know how to move around. Let's build off the base that you already have, as opposed to some of the more junior students were like, nah, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Come roll with me, right? I'm a superior to that. They hadn't quite eaten enough humble pie at that point, and that was really, really interesting to me to see that it was the guy who was the leader was the most humble, and the people that were brand new who had nothing to brag about were the least humble. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. You got more and more humble the better and better you got, and I really, really like that. That's something we should all strive for.
Yeah, I mean, you would be more humble the more advanced you are because you've been humbled more, right? So you know that you can't judge a book by its cover. You know what it's like to to be in that hardship and be in that physical and mental confrontation, and that brings a level of humility that guys can't experience unless they've got kicked in the teeth occasionally, both literally and figuratively.
Yes. The last thing I'll comment about that is I love what you just said, because there are times where I have engagements, we'll call it, disagreements maybe, via email. And email is the worst for this.
Yeah. Email and social media.
Yes. Exactly. That written text, faceless written text, is not actually a great way to communicate back and forth and have a dialogue with somebody.
Of course.
There have been times where I've had colleagues that we have had a disagreement of opinion about something around work, and the email quickly devolves into a bit confrontational, a bit underhanded, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We've all had that experience. And I've always said, the person that hasn't been punched in the mouth, quite literally, the person who has never felt a repercussion for their words, is the first person to sort of threaten, to bolster, to be argumentative, to do a put down, these types of things. Because I'm from a very rural, very poor area where if you said something you weren't supposed to say, there was a consequence, and it hurt. And so you quickly learn that, like, there are reactions to the things that you say. You have a responsibility for what you say. And I've always thought that a little bit of violence is actually okay, meaning you've gotten punched in the mouth, you've realized there's a consequence for you being inappropriate or rude or what have you. And that's a really valuable lesson that I think more men, unfortunately, are missing out on because of what you said earlier. Schools have really pulled that back. And we think boys roughhousing now is bad. And I would strongly disagree. I think that that's really important. And it's not because men love violence. Actually, I think it's because the opposite. Without understanding the repercussions, that's what can perpetuate more violence. We want the opposite. I don't want to get punched in the mouth. It sucks. Right?
Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I don't want to do that.
We do events, and one of the events that we do, one of the activities we do in those events is airsoft. Yeah. And it's funny, guys that have never done airsoft, they're so worried about it hurting. You know, they'll even bring it up like, does it hurt? I'm like, yes, it's actually supposed to hurt. If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be fun.
That's right.
Like the hurting, the pain is what makes it meaningful. Yeah. Because now you're trying to avoid being hurt. So you're being smart and you're hiding and you're stealth and you're undercover and you're taking sniper shots. Like, it's the pain or the anticipation of potential pain that makes you play the game more effectively. That's right. This is life. Yes. Like, if there's no consequence for your decisions, then you're going to be reckless. You're going to do whatever you want, things that aren't going to serve you. You're potentially going to put yourself and others at risk. You're going to undermine others and step all over them and act in immoral and unethical ways because there's no consequence to your decisions. This is why people can yap and run their mouths and feel okay with it, because they do it anonymously behind a keyboard and there's no ramifications for calling somebody, an inappropriate word or, taking things further than they need to go. If there was, they wouldn't do it. These are the same guys that if you're walking down the street, they're going to ask for your autograph. And yet on a keyboard, they're going to bitch and moan and gripe and complain about all the things that you're talking about.
That is incredibly well said. So let's end it there. First, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really
thank you, man. Yeah, I enjoyed our conversation.
On here. Quick plug for you. Where can people find more about you? Obviously, your Instagram page, your book, your website, all of that will be in the show notes. But a quick plug. Where should people go first?
Yeah, well, podcasting is a great place. So if you type Order of Man wherever you're listening to this, whether it's YouTube or anywhere else, you'll find what we're doing, all of our podcasts. And then you can follow me on primarily Instagram, which is at Ryan Michler. And then our website, orderofman.com. And between those three resources, you'll find everything that we're doing.
That's fantastic. Ryan, this has been awesome. I love that. I can't believe a whole hour went flying by that quick.
Yeah, it went quick. It always goes fast.
Really, really fast. So thank you. The show notes will be here in the There Is No Try podcast. I appreciate you guys tuning in every single week. To find more about what I'm up to, you can just go to pierrerogers.com or find me on Instagram. Again, appreciate the time. Thank you, the audience, for everyone being here. Until next time. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.